Thank you very much. Thank you. What a lovely introduction. So, hello. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for being here, staying, or just popping in. It's been a brilliant couple of days. My head's buzzing with everything I've heard and learnt. I'm sure yours is too. So, some of the things I'm going to say you've probably heard in other talks, which is reassuring for me anyway. Some of the things I've noticed are maybe different. So don't hesitate to pick up on those, and please do ask questions. I'd like you to ask questions as we go along, if you'd like to, in the chat box or in the question and answer box. I will definitely be leaving 5 minutes at the end, so please don't hesitate to ask questions. So we've been looking at neurodiverse learners in general, and I would like to look more particularly at students with ADHD. However, that does not mean that the things that I will suggest or the ideas that I'll bring up are not relevant to other students. And what I think we can see in general with what we do for our neurodiverse students is that things we do for certain students are going to work brilliantly with the majority of students. So that could be headphones to help us concentrate, which I always have in my classroom, for example, and many of my students, neurodiverse or not, will pick them up at different moments. Before we go any further, oops, there we go. Told you I couldn't use Zoom. So first of all, let's have a look at a little bit of theory. What is ADHD? If you could answer your yeses or nos, what you think in the chat box, in the discussion box, we'll just have a little quick whiz through. Is ADHD a specific educational need? What do you think? I'll give you a minute to put things in the box. Up. Okay, so trick question, perhaps. It is not considered a specific educational need. It is considered and defined as a neurodevelopmental disorder. I don't like the term disorder because it affects the brain and the nervous system. A specific educational need would be something probably that is only visible in an educational setting, perhaps, for example, dyslexia, whereas ADHD, and in fact, one of the criteria for ADHD is that symptoms are present in more than one aspect of life and affect more than one aspect. Would you say that ADHD is the ability to hyper-focus on something? Let me have a look in the box at your yeses and nos. So we don't perhaps associate ADHD with focus, probably more with inattention. Attention deficit is definitely in the title. However, that is misleading because it is not a lack of focus or attention. It is more a difficulty in changing focus. So we have different forms of focus. And I find the example of a light quite useful. So we can have our overhead light, which is going to light up everything. And we have our spotlight, which is going to focus on one particular thing. Our overhead light, which lights up everything, we can compare to the student who's sort of sitting in class, listening to the teacher, but noticing something on the wall, or maybe noticing what his friend is doing, which we would consider inattention, but is in fact a form of focus that we use when we're being creative or when we're problem solving or thinking up ideas, brainstorming, for example. And the other kind of focus, the one that we kind of perhaps expect in our classroom, is the narrow beam of focus on one particular subject. Now, people with ADHD have both of these, as we all do. Their difficulty is in changing from one to the other. So while they're busy, perhaps looking around at other things and problem solving, etc., they will then find it hard to refocus on the thing in question. So they do have an ability to hyperfocus. Does ADHD mainly affect boys, or does it affect boys more than girls? Yes, quite right. So more boys are diagnosed, assessed with ADHD, probably because one of the signs of ADHD, hyperactivity, is accentuated perhaps more in boys than in girls. But there's not necessarily more boys or more males with ADHD than girls. As with other specific learning needs, and yes, I consider ADHD a specific learning need, but as with other neurodiversities, girls can mask their symptoms more than boys. And so it can go unnoticed. The girls with ADHD in your classroom who are not assessed are probably the chatty ones, or the ones who daydream a little bit more, as opposed to boys who may be more active in the classroom. Does ADHD exist in adults? Yes, it does. As with many neurodiversities, it is a lifelong present that keeps on giving. Signs can be different. Adults often know how I'd like to think, hopefully adults know how to deal with the aspects of ADHD that affect them. So they might be the people that go to the gym more often, that do more activities. Certain jobs are more appealing to people with ADHD, as you probably know, because you are teachers, many of you, and in fact, teaching is one of the areas where many people with ADHD end up. Perhaps it's the problem solving, the activity, etc. So although less adults are assessed, probably because they weren't assessed as young people, it definitely exists. And one of the things we have seen over the last few years is, as we are having discussions with parents about maybe getting their children assessed, and I had this discussion just this week, asking a parent if they had considered an assessment for their child. And the mother's reaction was, it's not necessary. I was just the same at his age, which obviously begs the question, or suggests that the child's mother is probably ADHD as well. Is ADHD the reason your students interrupt their classmates? So I don't know if these are new yeses or old ones, but the answer is the same. So yes, it could be, not always. They might be interrupting for other reasons, and of course, not every student with ADHD interrupts. But blurting out the answers, interrupting, is a sign of ADHD. It's a sign of when we talk about ADHD, we often talk about attention deficiency and hyperactivity, but often we forget the impulsivity, which is the third part, if you like, that can make up ADHD. And it's this impulsivity that you may see in your classroom. Now, a thorny one for many of my colleagues as well, I've noticed. Is ADHD becoming more common? Okay. So, yeah, yes and no. Yes, as many of you have pointed out, it's becoming assessed more. So I would compare this, for example, to left-handedness. I read this somewhere. My father, when he grew up, was not allowed to write with his left hand. So he became right-handed, but he plays all his sport left-handed, etc. And when he was at school, 3% of the population were left-handed. A few years later, generations change. And when my children grow up, and we see that one of my nephews is left-handed, of course, that's fine. And the teachers spot this at school, and off he goes with his left hand. So today, 11% of the population are left-handed. Now, does that mean that more and more people are becoming left-handed? No, it just means that it's more accepted and part of schooling and part of society. And that is why we see more left-handed students in the classroom. However, considering if it's becoming more common, let's have a look at the last question. Is ADHD affected by lifestyle habits? Okay, so a few yeses there. So it can be. Now, normally one would say that as a neurodevelopment disorder, it is not. However, it's not quite that simple. There is a basis for ADHD that you are born with or not that will blossom more depending on certain lifestyle habits. And so things like contact with pesticides have been linked to ADHD during young age, childhood, or even mother's pregnancy. So that could also affect why it's maybe becoming more common or not. There's also the argument that more life on screens could be affecting ADHD in children. And it can be affecting attention, but that's more things that are called VAST, which is variable attention stimulus trait. This term was picked up by Dr. Edward Hallowell in his brilliant book, if you've not read it, ADHD 2.0. And VAST is, perhaps many of you have felt that you find it harder to concentrate on reading a long book now or something like that because of the life we live in, the screens we use, and the way we live our life. So that's kind of the lifestyle habits for ADHD. Let us move on to some practical tips now about what you can do for your ADHD students. Oh, I would have asked this at the beginning, but I think it's quite obvious. Do you have students with ADHD? Yes, of course you all do. There was a question, I just saw a little question about symptoms of ADHDs. Could you ask me that at the end? I will leave time for questions. Yes, you do. If you have more than 10 students, I'm guessing that statistically you will have students with ADHD, whether they know it or not. So some of the things we can put into place to support our students with ADHD or any neurodiversity, we've talked about, I've heard people mention in other talks. The first is seating. So it's interesting to see all these sort of these table designs of little islands around the classroom to make learning group-based activities, etc. In fact, often for students with ADHD, a simple line can be easier because it means it will make it simpler for them to look at the board, the teacher, if the teacher is front of room, and concentrate more on that. In many countries in the world, France and Switzerland, for example, it's suggested that students with ADHD are sat at the front during class, if you do have this traditional seating plan. However, of course, it's not necessarily a brilliant idea to sit all your neurodiverse students together. So I would see what works. However, what I would suggest is that you let students who need more space to organize their equipment, to organize their books, etc., to give students the space you can. So if that means leaving a spare desk, if possible, next to any students who need it, then why not suggest that? Another thing I use for my students to organize their books is I take in all those wonderful tote bags that we are always given at conferences. And those who want them can just hang them off the side of their desk. And it's just somewhere easy where they can keep things that they go to and come back. I would also plan my seating so that there is room for the students to move about during the lesson. We'll come to ideas about how they can move about in a little while. And also maybe to have space at the front for activities which could involve standing up, find someone who activities, talking to people rather than sitting talking to your neighbor. Why not make it a more realistic cocktail party scenario and have your students standing up to talk to people, which will give a little bit of activity and movement in the classroom. So I would make sure that I had room for that. Obviously, ideally, we'd all have reading corners and lovely, wonderful other things in our classrooms too. I was really interested in the earlier talk about posters and wall displays, which said a lot of the things that I think about, actually, which is it's really tempting in a young learner's classroom to put up all the brilliant things that they are doing, all their work, walls with spellings, synonyms, etc. But we really must be careful not to overdose and overstimulate our senses. I've walked into primary classrooms which give me a migraine after 5 minutes, and we have to think about the students who are in there all day. So do try and bear that in mind. Obviously, we're really proud of our students' work and want to put it up. Maybe it could go in the corridor. Not only would that give more people a chance to see it, but it might bring in some publicity and show everybody else how wonderful the things going on in your classroom are. So think about that and think about having a minimum of things, especially if, as I said, you have a forward seating classroom, so that you have a minimum of things around the board, for example, so that that's not going to distract your students. The other brilliant thing in any classroom is the cupboard. In the cupboard, you can keep all the spare copies of your textbooks. You can keep spare pencil cases. You can have them on your desk. And I would really encourage you to make your classroom somewhere where students who have forgotten things can just get up and go and get them out of the cupboard. If a student's forgotten to bring their book to the class, it's annoying. If they can't work, it's going to be more than annoying. And telling them off about the fact they've forgotten it is not going to make the book appear. It's just going to bring down the vibe in your classroom and make this student, who probably already has self-esteem issues, feel even worse about themselves. So why not give them a break? Go and get a book out of the back of the room. It doesn't matter. I don't know about you. It obviously depends on where we're teaching. But many of the books we order now also have digital versions. So the students can choose whether they want to leave their books in the classroom or leave them at home or use the digital version at home, whatever is easiest. So I would definitely encourage having spare everything for your students to use. And while we're talking about spare things, has anybody heard of Derek the Glue? Just looking in the chat box. I don't know if you have, but Derek the Glue is an internet sensation. And it's the idea of one teacher, which I thought was brilliant, which is to name your glue stick or your spare pens. And this will make sure that Derek is treated with the love and respect that he deserves and that he will be returned to you If you just have random glue sticks, like me, the random pens, you'll find they all disappear. But naming Derek, where is Derek and where is Derek's hat, will ensure that Derek comes back to the cupboard and you can use him again and again. So that's a tip for your spare things in the cupboard. Now let's have a little look at the lesson. What are we actually going to do while we're teaching? First thing, which I've heard mentioned already, is routines. And this is what I've found reassuring the more I've looked at how we can incorporate inclusive activities into our classrooms, which is a lot of the things we do as an ELT teacher are really reassuring for our neurodiverse students. So that's routines coming into the classroom, routines getting our books out, when do we correct the homework. This is also routines for me about how I plan my whiteboard, because I think that's very important. It's about always doing things at the same time to have work sent out, come back. It's reassuring for students. They know where they are. And if when you write your learning objectives on your board, which I would encourage you to do, you write the lesson organization. So just a quick, we'll be doing a speaking, a listening, then you'll be in pairs, and then we'll do a reading. This helps the students situate themselves and know where they are in the lesson. I think we could do a 3-day WebCon on instructions, and I still wouldn't get it right. So I'm not going to spend ages talking about instructions, but as you know, students who find it hard to concentrate are going to find it hard to concentrate on multi-step instructions. It's not always easy to break things down because your students are going to move through activities at different times. So it's not a question of getting everybody to look at the picture and describe it, stopping the class, bringing them back, and then answering the questions and giving instructions for that. But maybe the simplest is going to be to note your instructions on the board. Give the instructions and then note them on the board so that your students can come back to them and see where they are in the process. And again, if you can add any symbols to make that easy to understand, a speaking symbol, a writing, pen, etc., that's going to help your students. So it was interesting to see earlier somebody talking about slides, and a lot of the things that I've suggested here and in my materials that I've written about ADHD have actually come from my students. And at the end of the year, I've asked all my students to fill in questionnaires about how they learn and what is useful. And then I've gone back and matched those with their specific learning differences. And one thing that has come up from several students with ADHD, secondary but also late primary, is that they appreciate following on an interactive board on a screen rather than in a book. When it's on the screen, you can see we are literally all on the same page. They can see where we are and what we are doing. And they are focused towards the front and you, rather than all your students being focused on something different. But again, with many of these things, everybody's different, and you just need to see what will suit your students. Will they prefer slides or not? I would definitely, and I do definitely, spend a lot of time at the beginning especially, but again when needed, teaching strategies on how to learn my vocabulary, how to do the homework, how to do a listening comprehension, how to do reading comprehensions. And I think the more time we spend teaching the strategies, the more we will save later on in teaching our curriculum and our program. It's like, I believe it was Abraham Lincoln's quote on spending the time sharpening the axe. And the more time you spend sharpening the axe, the quicker it's going to be to chop down your tree. So I would definitely take time to explain using a think aloud method of, I'm looking at my text, now I'm thinking about this, I'm looking at the question, and now I'm going to look at the image, so that the students can see how to go around, do these activities. For many of us, and for many of our students, these things seem obvious. It's obvious how to do a listening comprehension. But for some of them, and probably for the students in difficulty, it's not obvious, not necessarily. So we definitely need time to look at this sort of thing. When we give homework, it's so easy. At the end of the lesson, you've had all this hubbub, you've done all these activities, everybody's on different stages. It's so easy just to say, finish that activity for homework. But we really must remember that the students who've not finished are the students in more difficulty, who are working harder than anybody else, and not just in your class. We've seen people today who are primary teachers and have the students all day. This may be your case, or they may come to you after school. They may come to you at one moment during their school day, but your class is not the only thing they have on their plate. And by effectively giving more homework to students with learning difficulties, you're just making more challenges for students who already have difficulties. So try and make homework fun, try and make it interactive, try and make it something that is going to spark creativity or problem solving. It could be go home and ask everybody what their favorite dessert is and report back to class. Go home and draw a picture of what is in your fridge to report back the food we eat, etc. Or it could be the opportunity to prepare for the next lesson, which will be an advantage for your students who are going to need more preparation. That could be in vocabulary. It could be giving them the short text you're going to be reading for those who would like to read it at home. But it really does need to be thought about. One of the things I like to do with my students, to give them the choice that's so important for them, is to offer starters, main courses, and desserts. And then for homework, if they like, they can choose different desserts. So a student could choose to do the grammar exercise, or they could choose to film themselves explaining the grammar to somebody else. Whatever works, and of course, whatever you have the technological possibilities to deal with that. I talked earlier about the chance to move around, which is obviously going to help our students with ADHD. And we're very lucky in the primary classroom, because I don't think anybody expects our students to sit still for the whole lesson. So take advantage of these moments, get them up, get them correcting the homework and writing on the board. I think it's wonderful when students come up to the board. They really feel motivated and part of the class. And have a look at some of these activities which involve movement to some extent. I'm going to go through them quickly, but are you familiar with them? Do any of you use running dictations, for example? Okay, so for those of you who are not familiar, running dictations are where you are going to have a short text. So this can be the text that you're going to use in class. It can be a text that revises the grammar or vocabulary that you've been using in class, or presenting new material. And you're going to just put up 2 or 3 copies of the texts depending on the size of your class, either in the classroom, or if it's possible, logistically speaking, maybe in the corridor outside, or down the stairs, or at the end of the corridor. I'll let you work out how that could work. And then you're going to put your students in groups, and then one of the group, they choose, they can take it in turns, it can be one person. One of them is going to go and look at the text, memorize, remember a short part of it, come back and tell somebody else who's going to write it down. They cannot take the paper over there. Now, obviously, some of your students are going to have difficulty using their short-term memory. They're going to have difficulty. That doesn't mean that students who find short-term memory activities need to work on our short-term memory. But you can point out to the students that they choose whether they're going to try and remember a big long bit of the text and only come back once or twice, or word by word and come back several times. Your students can take it in turns. So maybe the student who is stronger at writing can stay at writing. The student who could definitely do with some more exercise could be the one doing the running. But that's for them to work together, or depending on the age of your students, you can put them in groups and give them various tasks. And then, of course, the objective is for the group to be the first one to have finished writing it correctly. And that is when it's really useful for them to encourage your students to edit their work, and they can read it together and check there are no spelling mistakes. Another thing I like to use in the classroom is lines, lining up my students. So this works, word order lines work really well if we're doing adjectives, for example. The dark red car, the fast yellow bus. You give each student in the group a card and they have to get into the right order. But you can use lines for lots of other things. As I've mentioned just below, you can have line out discussions. So I use these often at the beginning of the year when we talk about our holidays. You get your students to stand facing somebody. So you effectively have a line of students facing this way and a line of students standing opposite them. And you give them all 1 minute to practice a dialogue or to ask questions to the other person. Then what you do is the person at the end of the row moves back to the front and everybody moves down one. So they now have a new partner. And then they repeat the activity. This activity is really good for practicing dialogues and for practicing questions or giving information, because we often hesitate when we're asking, what did you do in the holidays? What did you eat? Where did you go? The students, they learn this vocabulary, but then they only practice it once. And we're always very hesitant about repeating the same thing in case it gets boring. But by saying it to somebody different each time, you're introducing this novelty, which means that although they're repeating the action, they're not doing the same thing. And that gives them confidence, it will help them. And even your students who find it difficult will, by the end, be able to ask the question and give their phrases. It could also be sharing an opinion or asking students things they like, because everybody will obviously have a different opinion and different things they like. I've talked about coming up to the board to answer homework questions, but there's so many other things you can use the board for too. You could have a line down the middle, 2 teams, and then you can give vocab questions and have them run forward and write it out. One activity I like doing with my students is a stare activity, where you start with the word egg, and then the students in their teams must find a word that starts with G. So I'll let you do that now in the chat box. If my first word is egg, what is your horizontal word that begins with G going to be? Okay, go. Something else? Great. Okay. Okay, because great, we have great and goat. I'll take great. And that means that the word down is now going to start with a T. Can I have a word with T, please? Great. T. Perfect. Definitely. Good answer. Now, my word going down is going to start with A. So you can see how this game works. And in their groups, in their two teams, they must try and make as many stairs as they can, just practicing using all the English they've got, finding words that start or end with these letters. That's another thing you can do up at the board. And as you mentioned, I saw several of you have already used it. Find someone who is a great activity to get everybody up, get them to know each other, get them walking around, asking other people. Some of our students, of course, will not be comfortable walking around asking lots of other people. So I do always give them the choice. If you want to work on your own, you can. If you, even with an exercise like find someone who, if a student would prefer to sit down and just look at the questions and maybe write people they know in the answers rather than asking the others in the class, then I do always try to give them this opportunity. And finally, I think it's so important to look at well-being in your classroom. We're lucky, as we've said, they can do games. We've got so many fun activities, but we have to remember that our students with learning differences often have self-esteem and self-confidence issues because things are tough for them in many aspects of their education and school life. So students with ADHD can often be quite hypersensitive as well. So it's really important to watch out with that. So as we mentioned, some of the activities you can do for well-being can be connecting activities. It's interesting to see that we make an effort to get to know our students and we assume that they know each other quite well. That's not always the case, especially at the beginning of the year. So it's really worth spending time on these team building activities and reminding students that because one of them succeeds doesn't mean the others fail, that they can all succeed. And there's often a bit of competitivity, in my classrooms anyway. And so I would really spend a bit of time encouraging students to help each other, to tutor each other, when somebody has finished an activity to go and correct everybody else in the classroom, or if a student asks me a question and I know another student can give the answer, I will always say, go and ask Amelia rather than give the answer. It helps Amelia and it helps the student asking the question. All the games we have hopefully will increase this feeling of well-being. As I mentioned, our students can be quite sensitive. So I think we should also make our classrooms somewhere where if you feel you've given a negative comment, and I mean, I do, I'm certainly no angel. I occasionally, maybe often on a Friday, I'm not as patient as I would like. Then do speak to the students at the end. Always be the first to apologize. Be the first to model to your students you make mistakes. I told you off and I shouldn't have done because I know you're doing your best and I'm sorry. I get frustrated when I think that you didn't do your best work, but I shouldn't. And, you know, I'd like to apologize. Your students will take that with a pinch of salt and it will make it easier for them to apologize too. Music is wonderful in the primary classroom, whether it's calm music while they're doing an activity or maybe while they're reading. Or I have a colleague who puts on madness songs in the 2 minutes the students have to clear up, something to get them moving, to get them busy clearing up. So have a look at music and how you can use that in your classroom as well. And my final suggestion is to give your students a break. Life is tough. Things are tough for a lot of them. And we need to remember that. And if today's not the day, it doesn't matter, because next time will be. So always give them the chance to come back, to buy back. And if you can see they're having a bad day, then, give them a break. That's really what I'd like to talk about. And now I would really hope there are some questions, because often your questions make me think about what I'm doing in the classroom, and make me think about new ideas, etc. So I haven't had a look in the question and answer box. So if you could put your questions here, then that in the chat box, that would be brilliant. And yes, thank you, Michelle. I am going to be talking at our PCE and I can't wait.
There is one question here in there are questions here in the Q&A box, brilliant. But one of them is that one that you asked them to ask in the end of your talk. That's about symptoms. So what are the common symptoms of ADHD? Here thinking about 7 to 10-year-old student boys.
Right. So symptoms are the same for everybody. Symptoms have to have been going on for more than 6 months, first of all, because some of the symptoms can be confused with trauma or with life events. We could imagine a student whose parents are getting divorced and they're not sleeping, who may not be attentive in class, for example. If you go online, you can find the DSM-5 symptoms. There's a list of official psychological symptoms, but basically we are looking for difficulty in attention, being inattentive. For hyperactivity, it could be like moving your foot, your leg, inability to sit still. We need to remember that we're talking with young learners, so none of my primary can sit on a chair properly, and they're not all ADHD. So you need to take that into consideration as well. And as I mentioned, it could be impulsivity, blurting out. Often, as I said, it could be hypersensitivity. Hypersensitivity also on a physical level to lights or to the heat in a room, to things like that. They're the main things to look out for. But like I say, if you go online, you can find detailed. They should be present in more than one place, so at home and at school, and have lasted for more than 6 months. Any links to ADHD and ultra-processed foods? Yes, I cannot give you the name of any of the research, because that is one thing I forget. I always forget the name of anybody who's done any research when I read it. There have been links to ultra-processed food. However, that is more something that would be considered vast, as in it's variable. ADHD has to continue for more than 6 months, so it would not be dependent on diet. However, if you've ever taught students on Halloween or the day after Halloween, you know that sugar in their diet will affect their behavior, or will affect the behavior of many students, but that's not ADHD. I hope that answers that. ADHD students on medication, yes. try and find out if your students are on medication. If you're not the class teacher, if you're not in a school where you have access to this information, then send a questionnaire out to parents, and keep an eye on it. Because if you are teaching during the school day and the student has medication in the morning and at lunch, then you will notice a difference at the 11 o'clock slot and the 4 o'clock slot. Or if, like myself, you teach after lunch for 2 hours, you will notice if the student has not had their medication or not. And that could even be, so in my case, the students go to the school nurse. So that could be just a quick, have you been to the nurse at the beginning of the lesson?
Okay, Rachel, thank you very much. We don't have any more time, unfortunately. I guess we could keep on talking about that for quite a while. But we do have our PCE in Brighton coming up. So if you're going to Brighton, you can attend in person, but there is also the online version if you cannot be there. So that could be another wonderful opportunity to hear from Rachael Harris on that matter.
Thank you very much. Yes, I could go on about it all day. If anybody does have any questions, then don't hesitate to get in touch with me on LinkedIn. But now back over to you, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to everyone.
Thank you very much, Rachel. It was wonderful.